Once again, we meet to discuss research methods. What we'll be doing today is looking at literature review, the part 2 of it. Part 1 looked into how to find literature. Part 2 is going to tell us how to be able to write. So you're going to learn that after you have determined your topic and selected your available and relevant literature, you need to critically review the literature to write out relevant sections of your paper or your thesis. This session seeks to explain how to write and review your literature. So how do you review it? How do you write it out? This is what we are going to discuss in this particular session. And thank you very much for participating in what we have been doing for the past 3 sessions. Our session outline is broken into analyzing and writing review, restructuring the review, and what a good and a bad review looks like. Now I'll be asking some questions this time around, so I want you to pay attention. Now, we are looking at chapter 3, and we're going to look into literature review again. And that chapter is quite long in the book, so try and take your time to read it as you watch the videos. We have 3 things we are going to do today. Analyzing literature review is the first one. So analyzing and reviewing the literature would start by asking ourselves what goes into that. Now, the first time that we met, we talked about what literature review is, and we said it's a synthesis of available resources and materials which have a strong relation with the topic in question, accompanied by a description and critical evaluation and comparative analysis of each work. What we are going to do today is to look at the second part of the definition, the description, critical evaluation, and comparative analysis of each work. Now, a literature review plays a key role for the structure of a long essay. For example, some universities have a generic structure that looks like this: an abstract, an introduction, literature review, context of study, research methodology, results and discussion, and then conclusion. Now, the chapters that have been highlighted here, chapter 1, 2, and 5, play a very key role in your long essay. All of these chapters require a lot of literature to be able to substantiate your arguments. Chapter 1 will need some literature to be able to show what gaps exist in the literature, to point out what you need to do. Chapter 2 needs some literature to be able to discuss and explain the conceptual underpinnings of your topic area. So we are talking about corruption and in Africa. This is where you explain what corruption is, the different types of corruption, the forms of mitigating corruption in Africa, or the forms in which corruption exists in Africa. Good. Then in the results and discussion, you are going to compare what you said in chapter 2 with what you have found in chapter 3 and be able to come up with a conclusion. So you need some literature here too in chapter 5. So these areas play a very key role in your long essay. So please understand that every aspect of your long essay will require some literature that you need to be able to review, to be able to write it out. Good. Now, one thing I want to differentiate in writing is the fact that there are different ways in which we express ourselves in every literature write-up. We can write in a descriptive way or we can write in an analytical way. A descriptive writing usually summarizes what other people have found without saying what these findings mean for our investigation or our research. So we can just go on and just say that research on corruption in Africa has been done from different perspectives. This and this did it in South Africa, where they found that the church plays a key role in research, in combating corruption, or this and this did it in Ghana, and found out that proper policies or efficient policies or monitoring and evaluation can be able to curb corruption in the construction industry. But what I've done here is just summarize what is out there. It can be a chronological list or it can just be an overview of different papers. But it doesn't actually tell you what it means and relate to your work. When you start doing that, then you are moving beyond descriptive to what? Analytics or analytical writing. Remember, the definition of literature review says that it should accompany by a description and no stop at description, and a critical evaluation and comparative analysis of each work. Hence, every good literature review should move beyond description to go into more analytical writing. Now, what is analytical writing? Analytical writing means that there's a synthesis of the work and it passes judgment on the relative merits of the work. Means that you, after finding what has been there by description, you should pass judgment and find out whether it relates with other works or how does it connect or relate with your own work. For example, look at this. There seems to be a general agreement on X, And in the reference, you're seeing C. White 1987, Brown 1980, Black 1978, and Green 1975. Now, what you are trying to see here is that this person who is writing this has read White, Brown, Black, and Green's work and has been able to put them together in a succinct manner to be able to point out that there's a general agreement on X, that these authors are agreeing on issue X. That's what he's trying to emphasize here. Now, he was able to do that because he has been able to read these papers and point out what is the commonality among them, what is the common theme among them. Hence, there is a comparative analysis. Then he goes on to say, however, Green 1975 sees X as a consequence of Y, while Black puts X and Y as something. While Green's work has some limitations in that its main value lies in. Now, what is he doing? What he's doing is that he's doing both comparative analysis and critical evaluation of the works he has found. And that is where it takes your work beyond description to what? Analytical work. Now, analytical writing means that you should be able to pass judgment on the work by either relating it to your own work or relating it to other works. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Now, if you keep your work, you keep the writings that you are reading, that this guy has said this, and this guy has said that, and this guy has said that, and this guy discovered that, what it does is just doing descriptive. We ask ourselves that, and so what? What is the relevance of all this you are just saying? We just don't want summaries of what is out there. We want you to be able to look at the summaries and make a link, analytical link between one summary to with another summary. That makes it analytical writing. And that is what we are going to learn how to do today. Okay. So the first thing in the stages of analyzing literature are two: evaluating the source and analyzing the source. That's how you are able to analyze the literature and write. So we'll learn about analysis of the literature first, and after we learn about writing. The first thing, there are two things in the analysis of the literature: evaluating the source and then analyzing the source. So evaluating the source, we are going to ask ourselves that we have found some articles on EBSCOhost or Emerald. We're going to ask ourselves that, does this article tell us anything relevant to my research paper or to the work I'm doing? Now, what do we mean by that? Do you realize that the definition of literature review said something? It said that literature review is a synthesis of available resources and material with a strong relation with the topic in question. It means that anything we find on Emerald, anything that we find on EBSCOhost have to have a relationship with the topic in question. Is that not true? Good. Now, if you are saying that is true, that means that anything that we find, any article, you have to evaluate the source. Is it relevant for my research work or for the paper I'm working on? Number two, what do we mean by is it relevant? Who wrote this? Now, it means that you have to ask who is the author behind it. Sometimes an article can be written by a professor who has done extensive research in that area, or an article can be also written by somebody who is just a journalist, just giving you a viewpoint. So you have to be very careful who is writing the article that you are picking up from the internet or from the database. Then why did they write it? Why did they write it? What is the underpinnings of why they wrote it? Do they have something particular interest or angle they would like to present in the data? For example, you are doing a study and then you realize that you want some statistics on mobile penetration. Then you go and pick that from a Vodafone report. Now Vodafone is reporting it, so Vodafone is claiming that their mobile penetration is something like that. However, if you move from Vodafone and you go to an institution like NCA, that's the National Communication Authority of Ghana, now that is the regulator of the industry. So you say NCA reports, but Vodafone, you say Vodafone claims. Now, what are you trying to say? You are trying to distance yourself from what Vodafone is, because you don't know whether any objective work has been done on what is being claimed. You are more concerned about what is a report, because what is a report from NCA, because NCA is the regulator, is the objective body behind it. So we move from Vodafone claims to more of NCA reports, because NCA is more of the objective regulator in the particular industry you are writing about. So why did they write it now becomes an issue. Otherwise, because sometimes somebody can write and have an angle at writing, just want to project a particular perspective or viewpoint. How did they get their data? How did they come to their conclusions? That's another issue. When did they do the work? Is it up to date? What else do you know? Does it support or contradict other sources of evidence, comparing them? Now, one point I want to emphasize is it up to date? When you are doing your long essay, we always encourage that to establish very good arguments. Try to keep your work within the last 7 years so that you can have contemporary perspectives on the issue. Now, it doesn't mean that if something is beyond 7 years from the year you are in and you are doing the research, it's not relevant. It's relevant, but you don't make it that much in your work. The higher percentage of work should be in the more of the contemporary works that have been done in the area so that you can keep your arguments current. The reason is that if you are picking arguments based on something which is about 10 years old, it's likely that if any gap or any arguments were put across, somebody could have addressed in the last 10 years. So if you keep it within the 7 years, at least you have the likelihood of it being totally addressed may not be as much as something which was done about 40 years ago. Now, if I'm going beyond 10 years or even beyond 7 years, sometimes I will go beyond that to be able to establish or find a conceptual understanding about an issue. For example, if I'm trying to understand demand and supply curve, or one of the economic discussions of Adam Smith, I have to go and find some of his seminal works and read, or some of the articles that were published that far in the 60s to read. But if I'm looking for a review on that same topic, I'll look for something which is more contemporary. So if you are just looking for the very first article or some of the arguments that were put across a particular theory or a particular concept that was existed in 1980, it's relevant that you read that particular seminal work the very first time they did it, or the write-up that was done in 1980. However, if I'm looking for arguments of now, or now moving beyond 1980, I'm trying to look for arguments concerning the issue I'm trying to research on, and I want something which is current, and I want something which is within the last 7 years. So relevance is very, very important. Otherwise, somebody would have addressed the issue with the last 7 years, the last 10 years, and there's no originality left for you to contribute. Good. Now, another thing that we also try to point out is that whenever you are doing your write-up, you also want you to make sure that you're not picking the view from only one perspective. You are triangulating from different sources. So if you realize, when we read on Abbo's work the other time that we met, we talked about the fact that he was doing a write-up on corporate governance and firms financing decisions, and he talked about developed and developing countries. He just didn't look at only developed papers from developed countries or developed economies. He looked at both from developed economies and developing economies, which is very relevant. So he's able to do a comparative analysis. So to be able to do a very good comparative analysis, you should try and get papers from different sources, either from academic, comparing with practitioner or periodicals, or using periodicals to substantiate other arguments, or different sources or different perspectives, different geographic regions, using and comparing the perspectives of the issues that you are trying to study. Okay. And different evidence types and perspectives in order to get a balanced view. Overall, evaluation will give you a sense of how valuable or not the particular source is. So that comparison is very, very important. Okay. Now let's look at an example. Social networking. This is about social networking in the workplace. Social networking is increasingly becoming a phenomenon in the social and business lifestyle of employees. Statistics from the 2011 Forbes report on social networking in business stated that 85% of workers in America spend a minimum of 30 minutes of working hours to visit social networking websites. Very excellent. You see how it is written. The first one was an argument, and then the next one, which is statistics from the 2011 Forbes report, is a statistic coming from a Forbes magazine, a periodical, being used to support or substantiate this first argument. It said these statistics are not too far from that of Africans, as a recent study of South Africa also found that 70% of South African workers interviewed browse Facebook during working hours. Now, what has it done? It has compared two different statistics to be able to substantiate one point. It's telling you that this social networking usage in the workplace in the lifestyles of employees. It's not an issue just in the US. It's also in South Africa. So by the time you finish reading the first paragraph, it has been able to establish that social networking is an issue that is increasingly becoming part of the lifestyles of employees in the workplace. Secondly, it is an issue that has been experienced or observed in the US and also observed in Africa. So this topic that you are trying to discuss is something global. It's not something just about Africa or just about the US or just about America. So that is what the first paragraph have done. To be able to do that, you see one academic work here and then one Forbes report here. So we are bringing different sources together to substantiate an argument that was put across in the first sentence. Different sources together, Forbes here and Nugu, which is also an academic work, substantiation this one. Then it continues to say that, then again, beyond the concern on the growth in the use of social networking platforms in the workplace, there have been concerns about implications it has on both employers and employees. Another argument. There have been concerns about it in terms of its implication on employers and employees. While some employers have reported to requesting access passwords to employee accounts, others are exploring policies and strategies to leverage social media in marketing and sales. So one is employers asking the passwords of employees. Another is the use of social media, in the strategic use of social media in marketing and sales. Two different concerns being put together. And these two concerns be put together. One is from Jackson 2012. One is from BBC. Another is from Carmen. Another is from California Times. You can see a mixture of periodicals and academic works being put together. And all of them coming together to be able to put out this particular statement, which is the concern. There are two key issues here. The fact that social networking has become a concern for both employers and employees, and another thing is the fact that it's also increasing in the lifestyles of employees. Do you see that? And each of them has taken a paragraph. So how did the author come up with this? The first thing in analyzing a source is you should ask yourself that, apart from all the questions that I told you to ask, you should ask yourself that whenever you are looking at a source and you're reviewing it, are you looking for some specific item or data? For example, in looking at the Forbes one, we're looking for data on 85% of America spend a minimum of 30 minutes. That's what we look for here. We're looking at the Nugu's paper, we're looking for 70% of South African workers. So are you looking for a statistic? That's one question you could ask yourself. Or is there any conceptual model or concerns or points and key points that can be drawn from the literature? Or is there any particular method that has been used that you can be able to draw from the literature? So there could be so many things. This particular example that we are trying to examine here is just look at statistics and then concerns. So issues and then some statistics to support the key issues that are there. Okay. So analyzing a source. Look at it. Increasing phenomenon was the argument. Statistic here. Another one to the argument to put here. Then another set of another set of evidence to support the particular argument. So you see this one concern two, supporting this one. This one is about statistics, increasingly becoming a phenomenon. So there's a statistic here and there's a statistic here too. So you see that it's very, very evident in what you're analyzing the source. Analyze the source to look for a statistic or a key issue to be able to put across in your argument. So this is what we see here. The first one is, as an example, you have to select one sub-common theme and divide it into sub-topics that represent paragraph chunks. Like this paragraph was more about the concerns on social media. So we broke into two. One concern was on social media privacy. Another one was strategic use of social media in marketing and sales. So there's one concern and concern two, concern one, concern two. When we put them together, we have concerns about social media in the workplace. You see what is happening here? Concern one, concern two. Put them together. Concerns about implication has on employers and employees. So one sub-theme which can be broken into two, or an argument that can be broken into two. And that can represent each a paragraph or a sentence. Now, for each of the chunk, create a topic sentence. What sentence is here? While some employers are reported to requesting access passwords to employees. This one too. Others are exploring policies and strategies to leverage social media in the working place. Those are the sentences for each of the topics. One was about social media in the work, one about social media and passwords, and another about social media and its strategic use in marketing and sales. We have created our sentences. So those sentences describe what is in literature. Then after that, we put them together to compare them. And the things that make the comparison is this one. There have been concerns about the implication it has on both employers and employees. So now when we put them together, we now become while others. So these two sentences now support this sentence. Do you realize it? These two sentences now support this sentence. So if it was not that case, what you would have been having is that you would have having a challenge, because this one will be one sentence on disjointed on its own. This will also be a sentence on its own. But when we put the two sentences together and give it a cover note or an envelope, it then puts everything into context. So this enveloping sentence covers both sentences here. Okay. Then when you have put the sentences together, then you have to put the evidence. Jackson, California, Carmen, and BBC as what? Supporting evidence to the arguments or the illustrations you have put there. Look at it. This one sentence came, this sentence came. Now we are putting what references here to be able to show that these things are not just coming from our minds. They are things that are happening and we are putting them there. Without them, we say, says who? Who said that? Where is it? While there have been some concern, where is it from? California Times. The other one's from Carmen and from BBC, and the other one's from Jackson. Do you realize it? Okay. So what you realize here is that literary review is not just a summary of what arguments, but it's more about, or a summary of just available resources. It's more about argument, evidence, and illustration. Look at it. An argument is here, evidence is here, and illustrations are here, while some and others are. These are illustrations of this one. Do you realize it? These two sentences are illustrations of this one. So in doing a good literature review, you need an argument, you need an illustration, and you also need evidence. Evidence comes from this ones. These references are there. So as nobody will just say that, where did you take it from? Do you realize it? So argument, evidence, illustration makes literature review. If anytime I'm reading any student's work, I look for arguments and I look for illustrations of the arguments and I look for evidence. Illustrations helps to understand the argument better. It helps to give more understanding to the argument, because the arguments is just a summary, but the illustration will break it down and give it different instances. You see, the other one was pointing out that there's social media is increasing in the workplace. Then give an example from the US and an example from South Africa. So by the time you finish reading the illustrations, you realize that the issue is not just about the US, it's a global issue. You realize it? Good. So literature review is about argument, evidence, and what? Illustration. Argument, evidence, illustration. So now that we have been able to know how to analyze this, so the next thing is that how do we structure a review? How do we put it together to do a write-up? Okay, now I'm going to topic 2, structuring the review. Any write-up that you put together always has 3 parts: an introduction, an opening sentence. If it's a whole paper, it may be an opening paragraph. Then it has a body where the literature is put together, and then it has a conclusion, a takeaway for somebody. What is the key thing you are trying to put across? But it's not always that you get the conclusion. The conclusion can actually be another paragraph that leads into another paragraph. So the first 2 things are the most important in every type of literature review you are doing. So whenever I look at your literature review, not as a chapter, but as a section, small section, you are putting literature together. I'm looking for an opening sentence for the arguments, and I'm looking at the body that comes to substantiate the argument. Okay. Now, there are different ways of structuring a review. You can either use chronological, whether you look at time, because you have downloaded literature. So you can look at it, papers that were published on the topic on 1990. 19 in 2000 and in the 2000s and early 2000 and the late 2000s, maybe 3. So in the 90s, 2001 to 2005, and maybe 2006 to 2010, and then 2011 to 2015. So that could be one way you could do it. So chronology. Then you can also look at it in terms of themes. Remember what we said earlier when we look at corruption in Africa. We saw one theme on the church in Africa. We saw another theme on Islam, Africa, and corruption. And we also saw church, Africa, and corruption. We saw something on financial crime, Africa, and corruption. And then there was another one too on oil, corruption, and Africa. So about 5 themes or 4 themes there. So you have a number of themes that could be done. Then you can also look at it in terms of methodology. Papers that use the quantitative approach, or papers that use the qualitative approach, or papers that are done at the national level, that's the macro level, or papers that are done at the meso level, that's the industry level or firm level, or papers that are done at the micro level, that's at the individual level. So sometimes you can have papers that are done at different levels. Remember we said level of analysis gap. We talked about that earlier. Okay, so let's look at the chronological perspective. Now chronology means that the writer wants to write to be able to show a clear change in the issue over time. The thing that he's trying to study, the topic he's trying to study, he wants to show you that there will be a change in the issue over time, and this is a style of writing. So let's look at the example here. Literature demonstrates that the key factors which contribute to unemployment in Africa have tended to change over time. In the late 1990s, researchers argued that inflation and low wages contributed to unemployment. UG 2000 and Benson 2003. Now all these are just examples of what he is trying to talk about papers in 1990. Now the chronological one means that the writer wants to show that the issue that he's trying to study have tended to change over time. How has the issue changed over time? Now let's look at this example. Literature demonstrates that the key factors which contribute to unemployment in Africa have tended to change over time. In the late 1990s, researchers argued that inflation and low wages contribute to unemployment. UG 2000 and Benson 2003. Now, he has pointed this one out, so he's going to do an illustration. So he said that, for example, a study by UG 2000 on unemployment in banking industry in Nigeria highlighted that inflation affected turnover of banks, which also had an effect in salary payments. Over 2,000 banks lost their jobs by the end of 1999. What are we trying to say? Now, all this, for example, is an illustration of what has been pointed out in the first instance. The first instance, he said that in the late 1990s, researchers argued that inflation and low wages contributed to unemployment. So, he mentioned that UG 2000. So, UG 2000 is to be able to illustrate it, he illustrated UG 2000's paper. That is what you see here. And he pointed out that this is what happened in Nigeria. Now, one thing that you have seen here is that there is a paper here, there's a paper here. But why is that Uche's own is illustrated, but Benson's own is not illustrated? Uche's one is the one he read, and that's a highly relevant paper. I mentioned that earlier. So Benson's own is likely to be a paper that also supports the same issue, but he or she didn't read it entirely. So he's just using to show that Benson and Uche agree on that issue. So you're seeing comparative analysis taking place. And to illustrate what issue it is, he illustrated by Uche's paper. So you see that literature reviews about argument, evidence as this, an illustration. But this is just a write-up. There's an opening sentence. There is an argument that which communicates the argument. Now he's illustrating. The whole thing too is a whole big review. So then from there, he said, on the other hand, by 2004, we moved the 90s into the 2004 because he's writing chronologically. So we have to look at the time. Researchers discussed that the lack of capital for start-up initiatives and high interest rates on loans stalled entrepreneurial ventures and contributed to unemployment or the lack of job opportunities. TACU 2005, a comparative study which was done by Kinson on the SME industry in Ghana and Uganda shares similar findings, similar to TACU's own, on the effects of startup capital and interest loans on entrepreneurship and unemployment. So what he has done here is to talk about the fact that Kinson and TACU have done studies that show that lack of capital for startup initiatives and interest rates which are high affect entrepreneurial ventures which lead to unemployment. Do you realize it? That's what he has pointed out. And these were the issues that were coming up in 2004. Then he goes on to say, in a recent study on unemployment in Egypt, Salia 2011 found political instability, poor governance, and lack of foreign direct investment to be critical factors influencing unemployment. Other studies in Cote d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone attest to these findings. Now, he's talking about the fact that political instability, poor governance, and lack of foreign direct investment have influenced and led to unemployment in a particular country, being Egypt. Now, any country which has also gone through political instability and poor governance is likely to have the same. So he points out that studies on Cote d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone, which you just need to go to literature and just find out which other studies have also found out the same. So these two studies, Johnson 2009, Penn 2010, he may have not read the whole thing. He just realized in the abstract that these studies were about political instability and how it affects unemployment in these countries, and that was enough. The ones that he read was the one on Salia, and he has pointed it out there. But what does here happen here? You have three types of categorizations of time. You have those which was in the late 90s, those in the early 2000s, and those in the current 2000s. That's between in the recent times. Now, what it has been able to do is to look at the factors that influence unemployment in each of the three blocks. So he says that in effect, unemployment in Africa may be viewed from a multifaceted perspective. It cannot be reduced to a single factor. And this is true. You can see it from, he has illustrated that to get to point out this argument. Whenever somebody is writing chronologically, his objective is to be able to lead to a particular point. He demonstrates that issue has changed over time. That particular point I want to put across is the fact that what I'm trying to study has changed over time, or has the views on the perspectives have changed over time, and this is what the views are. So this one, he did it through 1990s, early 2000s, and the recent 2000s, and that's what you can see in here. Do you realize it? Good. So this is a chronological way of writing. Now there's another way of writing which is not chronological. Chronological is very good if you want to put some points across. The other way of writing which is not chronological is called thematic writing, where you look at the themes. Like in the corruption and Africa study, we could talk about oil and corruption in Africa, church corruption in Africa, Islam corruption in Africa, and then financial crime corruption Africa. See, I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. These are themes. Let's look at this example. Somebody's writing on unemployment and poverty. And then what are the themes that can come up? What is the structure of unemployment? So what is unemployment? Causes of unemployment. What is the structure of poverty? What causes poverty? What's the link between poverty and unemployment? And mitigating poverty and the unemployed. So what you can then do is to look for literature or categorize the literature based on these themes. So each folder will have a set of papers in them, and you can use that to write. Now this is a very structured way which is following the themes. So you can structure your literature review based on themes. It means that your papers have been downloaded and arranged in your folders based on themes, not based on time. In fact, this is a better approach of writing. Even within this, you could actually arrange the discussion of what is unemployment according to time, to show that the definition for unemployment in the 90s is different from the definition for unemployment in the 2000s, if only it exists. So even in writing thematically, within the themes, you can also write what? Chronologically. And even in writing chronologically, within the chronological times, you can also write thematically. So you can combine two. Let's see another one. This is about mobile, impact of mobiles and micro trading. So there are two themes, two topics here, mobiles and micro trading. So the first one is, what is trading? Then the next one is stages of trading. Then the benefits of using mobile phone in trade, and the impact of mobile phones on trade. That's all. So these are also different categories. Somebody can also add one, challenges of using mobile phones and trade. You realize it? So that could be themes. And if for each of the themes, you go into the literature to find something that can help him write that section thematically. Okay. Then you can also write methodologically. Methodologically means that you are writing according to geographic regions. Prof. Abel's paper that we looked at in the 2 sessions ago, what we realized is that he was writing about capital structure and then what? Corporate governance, capital structure of firms financing decisions, and then corporate governance. And he realized that the papers have been published that have been published on these themes have been focused on what developed economies at the expense of developing economies. So what you're doing is compare one geographic region against another geographic region, and that's what one thing can do: developed against developed, or countries against other countries, or rural against urban. It all depends on what you are finding in the literature. Another thing that others try to do is that they compare the different types of method of collection of data. While some studies have been using quantitative methods, other studies have been using qualitative methods, and you summarize each of them and compare them against each other. But what is more often done is the develop against developing. Another person can also look at it from the unit of analysis: micro, meso, macro, and meta. Like I mentioned earlier, you could actually look at child trafficking, where you look at its impact on victims, which is at the individual level; the role of the church, which is more at the meso level; the role of national policy, which is more at the macro level. Or you can also compare policies in Nigeria again with policies in Ghana, or policies by the ECOWAS states. I hope you understand me. And that is more of what a global, cross-country, or cross-national perspective. It's all about what you want to write. The style is up to you. You could either use thematically and add chronologically, or chronologically and bring thematically. That's what I always advise students to do: thematically, then add other styles to it. Go thematically, focus on the themes, because that's what we are interested in. And then you can add the geographic comparisons, and you can add, that's the methodological perspective. You can add the chronological perspective too. Okay, but you can do it thematically within thematically. What do I mean by that? Your theme is poverty. Then within that theme, look at the social definition for poverty, the economic definition for poverty, and then there is maybe cultural definition for poverty. And within each of them, you can even have other themes under them. So you can have themes within themes. I hope you understand me. Okay, good. Now look at this. Social networking is increasingly becoming a phenomenon in social and business lifestyles of employees. Statistics from the Forbes report. You see, the first report was from America, and then the South African report was from South Africa. So compare geographic against geographic perspective. So you see that the statement was given, which was a key argument, but he compared it methodologically, one developed against developed, to be able to substantiate here. When you go to here, then again, beyond the concern on the growth of the use of social networking in the workplace, there have been concerns. So the concern was concern 1, access to passwords, and concern 2, social media and strategic use in marketing and sales. So those ones are thematically. The top part is not thematical. The top part is more about what? Methodologically, comparing one geographic region to another geographic region. The second part was more thematically. So it's combining two approaches in what? One writing. Do you see what I'm trying to say? And then when it gets somehow, this is the concluding sentence at the end of the write-up. Somehow, businesses have to respond to this growing phenomenon. However, the questions are: should employers be concerned? What are the potential risks and benefits of social networking in the workplace, and how can businesses address the risk? So that's the concluding sentence for the write-up. Every literature review has an opening sentence, a body, and then what? A concluding sentence. And that's what you see here. And if you look at it in sub-paragraphs, they all have opening sentence and then some body comparisons. Do you realize it? Okay. Now, let me ask you a question now. How do you identify a good and a bad literature review? Now, this is said a bad review. What is bad about it? What is bad about it? Sexual harassment has many consequences. Full stop. Adams, Cote, and Paget found some women students said they avoided taking a class or working with certain professors because of the risk of harassment. They also found that men and women students reacted differently. Benson and Thompson study in social problems list many problems created by sexual harassment. In their excellent book, The Professor, Dish and Weiner give a long list of difficulties victims have suffered. So, what is wrong about this?
So the first statement, sexual harassment has many consequences. This statement should have gotten a source, somebody, an authority should have been cited there. but there's no citation there. That's the first part of it. And then I think for now, that's what I've identified.
I think there is no connection between the statements that the person made, in that if sexual harassment has many consequences, what are the consequences? He stated some authors that have written on that, and then they also found that men and women students react differently. So what are the reactions? So I see there are no connections between the statements.
Taking your answers, or both answers, I like the second answer more than the first answer. The reason being the fact that the write-up is very descriptive in this form. Remember, we said descriptive just summarize what is there without going on to pass judgment. So as you said, you mentioned something about consequences, but you didn't even give us any indication on what the consequences are. It doesn't mean that there should be a reference here. Actually, you could actually make a statement that sexual harassment has many consequences, and then make an argument as, for example, for instance, as an illustration of this one. But you didn't do that. And the subsequent sentences that follow the consequences are just disjointed. You don't see the link between those sentences and the other ones. So they are just summaries of independent work splashed on the screen. Do you realize that? Independent work that are splashed on the screen, which means that there's a need for there to be a link between them. We said that literature reviews are about argument, evidence, illustration, and they are tied together. They're not just an argument should have a relationship with the evidence or the illustration that is being put across, and that's not done. But then let's look at this one. Victims of sexual harassment suffer a range of consequences, from lowered self-esteem and loss of self-confidence to withdrawal from social interaction, change career goals, and depression. And list of references are given. For example, Adams, Cote, and Paget noted that 13% of women students said they avoided taking a class or working with certain professors because of the risk of harassment. So what is good about this one?
Comparatively, comparing this with the first one, with this one, you can clearly see that the writer brought what we've been discussing: argument, evidence, and illustrations. The author would bring in his argument, cite those who wrote that thing, and then find an illustration. That's where he brought in the examples. For example, Adam and the rest noted that 13%, that those are his illustrations. And then the arguments are that the victims of sexual harassment suffer a range of consequences. And then he supported that with his evidence, which are the texts, the literature that he used.
With this one, after giving the instances from social interaction, changed career goals, and depression, he cites them. He gives the instances. So Adams is there, quotes K, and then Paget with the years they conducted their studies there, and then he came down to elaborate on the things he has listed up there, and that makes it a very good literature review.
Now, what you have said is rightly noted. The fact that all their consequences are outlined, there are references here to support the consequences, and one of the references is illustrated. That's one thing you should see. One of the references is illustrated. However, if this work was submitted as of this academic year, maybe 2015, there be something fundamentally flawed about this. The reference would have been old, but we are not saying it was submitted this year. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. It would have been very, very outdated anyway. But this is also good. The write-up is good. So we see that good literature review always has argument, evidence, and illustration. That's a very, very core thing about literature review. Whenever you do a literature review, you are not just doing an annotated bibliography, or you're not doing a summary of available materials. You are trying to make sure that you put arguments together, you put your evidence together, and then you show illustration. And that is what a good literature review should look like. So what we'll try to do next time is to go beyond that and ask ourselves, how do you provide the evidence? How do you do the referencing? How do you provide the evidence for the illustration? Thank you very much.